If you're a fan of Stoicism, I recommend getting this book, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And if you enjoy this podcast and want to support it, use the link in the description to purchase the book. Without further ado, let's get into it. Live on in your blessings, your destiny's been won, but ours calls us from one ordeal to the next. Virgil. The great law of nature is that it never stops. There is no end. Just when you think you've successfully navigated one obstacle, another emerges. But that's what keeps life interesting. And as you're starting to see, that's what creates opportunities. Life is a process of breaking through these impediments, a series of fortified lines that we must break through. Each time you'll learn something new. Each time you'll develop strength, wisdom, and perspective. Each time a little more of the competition falls away, until all that is left is you, the best version of you. As the Haitian proverb puts it, behind mountains are more mountains. Elysium is a myth. One does not overcome an obstacle to enter the land of no obstacles. On the contrary, the more you accomplish, the more things will stand in your way. There are always more obstacles, bigger challenges. You're always fighting uphill. Get used to it and train accordingly. Knowing that life is a marathon and not a sprint is important. Conserve your energy. Understand that each battle is only one of many and that you can use it to make the next one easier. More importantly, you must keep them all in real perspective. Passing one obstacle simply says you're worthy of more. The world seems to keep throwing them at you once it knows you can take it, which is good, because we get better with every attempt. Never rattle, never frantic, always hustling, always acting with creativity. Never anything but deliberate. Never attempting to do the impossible, but everything up to that line. Simply flipping the obstacles that life throws at you by improving in spite of them, because of them, and therefore no longer afraid, but excited, cheerful, and eagerly anticipating the next round. This is an excerpt from The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Ryan Holiday is a contemporary author, entrepreneur, and in my opinion, he revitalized Stoicism for the 21st century through his books. He lives on a ranch. He also owns a bookstore, which is pretty neat. This book is split into 3 parts. The first section is perception, the second is action, and the third is will. And I'm going to follow that order for this episode. As Holiday mentions in the excerpt that we read, the great law of nature is that it never stops. There is no end. There is no land of no obstacle. Elysium is a myth. The more you overcome, the more challenges you get. As Holiday writes, the more you accomplish, the more things will stand in your way. There are always more obstacles, bigger challenges. You're always fighting uphill. Get used to it and train accordingly. You also learn this lesson when you're training martial arts. The better you get, it seems that the better people ahead of you get as well. The more difficult the training seems to get. And so if your training is easy, it means that either you are not growing or the people you're training with are not growing. And analogously, that is our whole life. Life is a process of breaking through these impediments, these obstacles that are in our way. And it is through overcoming these obstacles that we become better men and better women. What does it take to overcome obstacles? Holiday says, overcoming obstacle is a discipline of 3 critical steps. It's 3 interdependent, interconnected, and fluidly contingent disciplines: perception, action, and the will. We've looked at these 3 things in most of our episodes. Remember the first episode we did with Viktor Frankl? It was about Frankl realizing that he, 1, had a will to meaning, and 2, it was him understanding and perceiving reality as it was, as it truly was, not what he thought it was. And the reality for him was that he was stuck in a concentration camp, and he had to accept that first before he could do anything else. And the third thing for Frankl was his action to live. Once he perceived reality as it was, and he understood where he was, then he had the action to live, His will to meaning came alive, and he had to act accordingly. And also the episode we did with Epictetus. Epictetus teaches us that our suffering is only the result of our perception. Epictetus' point is that we suffer more in our imagination than in reality. And if only you can realize that, then will you also understand that it is your attachment to this world, to the material world, that is causing your suffering. And specifically on the discipline of action, the episode we did with Arnold Schwarzenegger, where his whole point was him teaching us the value of action. This German phrase, wenn schon, then schon, which means if you're going to do something, do it with everything that you've got, and do not doubt yourself when you're doing it. Because you'll have naysayers, you'll have doubters, you'll have haters. But if your voice is the loudest and you are willing to take action, that is all that matters. Because in you taking action, that is when you'll start forging yourself. So Holiday writes, as it turns out, this is one thing all great men and women of history have in common. Like oxygen to a fire, obstacles became fuel for the blaze that was their ambition. Nothing could stop them. They were and continue to be impossible to discourage or contain. Every impediment only served to make the inferno within them burn with greater ferocity. What it means is that you have the power within yourself to make every situation, every adversity and struggle as a step towards building your virtues. Or you have the power within yourself to make your adversity, the situations of struggle, a crutch for you to lean more into your vices. And it is all up to you which you fuel, whether you're going to fuel your virtues or whether you're going to fuel your vices. And personally, I think the Stoic writings are one of the best for getting an understanding of this particular perspective. That it is you and only you who is responsible for your life. And so Ryan Holiday writes about the Stoics when he says in the introduction, no philosophic writing is more accessible. It feels like it was written last year, not last millennium. But I have done my best to collect, understand, and now publish their lessons and tricks. Ancient philosophy never cared much for authorship or originality. All writers did their best to translate and explain the wisdom of the greats as it had been passed down in books, diaries, songs, poems, and stories. All these refined in the crucible of human experience over thousands of years. This sums up why we're studying these books, these ancient books, why we're studying some of the wisest minds in human history. We've never cared much for authorship or originality, or whether somebody's a heretic or whether somebody's orthodox, whether somebody's politically correct or politically incorrect. We care whether there is wisdom, whether there is truth and beauty. There's a whole bunch of people who want to be unique, who want to be correct, who want to be different simply for the sake of it, not because there's wisdom in their position. But that's not you and I. If we are considered unique or different or a heretic or orthodox or correct, it's not because we tried to be. It's because we walked the path of wisdom. But if that path makes us walk against the grain of the prevailing view, so be it. We study these books because we're after freedom. We're after wisdom. I'm going to read this story that Holiday mentions. And I quote, there is an old Zen story about a king whose people had grown soft and entitled. Dissatisfied with this state of affairs, he hoped to teach them a lesson. His plan was simple. He would place a large boulder in the middle of the main road, completely blocking entry into the city. He would then hide nearby and observe their reactions. How would they respond? Would they band together to remove it, or would they get discouraged, quit, and return home? With growing disappointment, the king watched as subjects after subject came to this impediment and turned away, or at best tried half-heartedly before giving up. Many openly complained or cursed the king or fortune or bemoaned the inconvenience, but none managed to do anything about it. After several days, a lone peasant came along on his way into town. He did not turn away. Instead, he strained and strained, trying to push it out of the way. Then an idea came to him. He scrambled into the nearby woods to find something he could use as leverage. Finally, he returned with a large branch that he had crafted into a lever and deployed it to dislodge the massive rock from the road. Beneath the rock were a purse of gold coins and a note from the king, which said, "The obstacle in the path becomes the path. Never forget, within every obstacle is an opportunity to improve our conditions." You and I are called to be the peasant, not the villagers who gave up, who tried half-heartedly, but the peasant who kept trying and found a way to dislodge the rock from the middle of the road. Is it that you're not doing something because you lack support? Do you think that your skin color is holding you back from doing whatever it is that you want to do? Do you have a lack of resources? Whatever the excuses and obstacles, true or fiction, understand that that obstacle is your way forward. Your disadvantage is your strength. Find the strength within yourself, for there is always a way, and it's always there. And whatever obstacle is in your way, whatever impediment is there, whatever struggle or suffering that you're having, it is never beyond you. It is never beyond what you can bear and what you can overcome. And it reminds me of a quote from 1 Corinthians 10:13, which is in the Bible. And it reads, "No temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, he will also provide an escape so that you can stand up under it." This verse is applicable outside of temptation, and whether you believe in God or not. Because the idea is whatever is in your way, whether it's a temptation, whether it's an obstacle, it is never beyond what you can bear. You can almost always overcome it. That is the lesson here. There's an inspiring story that Holiday mentions of Hurricane Carter, who is accused of triple homicide, which he did not commit. And so Holiday writes, "Reuben Hurricane Carter, a top contender for the middleweight title at the height of his boxing career in the mid-1960s, was wrongly accused of a horrific crime he did not commit, triple homicide. He went on trial, and a biased, bogus verdict followed, 3 life sentences. It was a dizzying fall from the heights of success and fame. Carter reported to prison in an expensive tailor suit, wearing a $5,000 diamond ring and a gold watch. And so, waiting in line to be entered into the general inmate population, he asked to speak to someone in charge. Looking the warden in the eye, Carter proceeded to inform him and the guards that he was not giving up the last thing he controlled, himself. In this remarkable declaration, he told them in so many words, "I know you had nothing to do with the injustice that brought me to this jail, so I am willing to stay here until I get out. But I will not, under any circumstances, be treated like a prisoner because I am not and never will be powerless." And I skip ahead. It took 19 years and 2 trials to overcome that verdict. But when Carter walked out of prison, he simply resumed his life. No civil suit to recover damages. Carter did not even request an apology from the court, because to him, that would imply they had taken something of his that Carter felt he was owed. That had never been his view. Even in the dark depths of solitary confinement, he made his choice. "This can't harm me. I might not have wanted it to happen, but I decided how it will affect me. No one else has the right." That's a powerful story. And it reminds me of Viktor Frankl's situation when he's in the concentration camp and comes to a very similar realization. He comes to the realization that everything can be taken from him. His dignity, his family, his work. But the one thing they cannot take from him, both in Hurricane's case and Frankl's case, is their mind. No one can control your mind. And so both of them became a master of their own mind. And that is a reminder for you and I to be like them, insofar as we must master our mind. We must rule over ourselves. And that is a repeating theme in all of our readings of these works. Whether it's the Buddha, whether it's Lao Tzu, whether it's King Solomon. All of them teach that without you ruling over your mind, you become a slave to it. And if you become a slave to it, you're no longer free and you're no longer able to perceive reality as is. And what you end up perceiving is a false reality. And you start to become a victim of the situation, When in this case of Hurricane said, I am not going to be a victim, even though he was falsely accused of triple homicide. And once he made up his mind, there was no turning back. So you must fortify your mind. So Holiday writes, we decide what we will make of each and every situation. We decide whether we'll break or whether we'll resist. We decide whether we'll assent or reject. No one can force us to give up or believe something that is untrue. Our perception are the thing that we are in complete control of. So now we're getting into the first part of the 3 disciplines, which is perception, action, and will. And so when Holiday says, we decide what we make of each and every situation, it brought up something Frankl wrote when he says, in accepting this challenge to suffer bravely, life has a meaning up to the last moment and retains this meaning literally to the end. In other words, life's meaning is an unconditional one, for it even includes the potential meaning of unavoidable suffering. The point is, no one can force you to give up on yourself. Nobody. The only person that makes you give up and abandon your dreams, abandon yourself, abandon your pursuit in becoming more virtuous is yourself. It's true, our world is filled with propaganda, whether that's the movies you watch, the news that you read, everything is trying to influence you. But now that you are aware of that fact, you already have the key to overcoming it. Your awareness of this, that is the key. And Holiday's point is, you have to see reality as is. Your perception of reality is what controls how you act in this world. And so he writes, there is no good or bad without us. There is only perception. There is the event and the story we tell ourselves about what it means. The person you are today, the characters that you have, your understanding of yourself, is a projection of your thoughts that you've had about yourself based on the experiences that you've had in the past. But the truth is, you do not remember everything about your past. You simply carry a thread. And sometimes that thread is biased. Sometimes that thread is tainted. So if you're not careful, the story you tell yourself will either make it more difficult for you to overcome obstacles, or it will strengthen you in your path of overcoming the obstacle. And it reminds me of Maxwell Maltz, another episode that we've done earlier. And Maltz's point is that the story you tell yourself can be shaped even today is not through willpower, because willpower will only take you so far. What Maxwell Maltz says is you must be willing to go back to those memories in the past and relive it in such a way that you want it to have happened. And feel everything about that moment in the past. And only through that will you be able to shape the story that you tell yourself. But until you do that, you will consistently be repeating a theme that you want to overcome, but you cannot overcome since you're stuck in the past. So he gives the example of somebody who thinks that they are not a public speaker because sometime when they were in 8th grade, their teachers said they cannot be public speakers, that they stutter too much. And as a result, the person goes and lives their whole life thinking that they are not a public speaker. And in Maltz's experience and his practice, if he can take that person to go back to that exact moment and reshape the whole thing and or forget that whole moment and create a new memory in one sense, then this person who thought they were not a public speaker for years and years on end will all of a sudden start to become a public speaker, will start to become articulate, will start to become confident in what they say. And it is all about perception. And that is a similar point Holiday is making right now. Ryan Holiday writes, in the Book of 5 Rings, Musashi notes the difference between observing and perceiving. The perceiving eye is weak, he wrote. The observing eye is strong. Musashi understood that the observing eye sees simply what is there. The perceiving eye sees more than what is there. So listen to the episode that we've done on Musashi. One of the points that Musashi teaches is to see reality as it is, not what you think it is. And so Holiday says the same thing. When you can observe reality without any judgment, because when you judge, you distort reality. So when you can perceive things, observe things without judgment, that is when it becomes strong. So Holiday goes on to say, take your situation and pretend it is not happening to you. Pretend it is not important, that it doesn't matter. How much easier would it be for you to know what to do? How much more quickly and dispassionately could you size up the scenario and its options? You could write it off, greet it calmly. And this is a tactic that I've employed for many years. When in a heated situation or an argument or things are going awry, I begin to imagine myself watching the scenario as in third person. And this has the great advantage of not letting myself get caught up in the emotional turmoil, emotional responses, and allows me to see things more objectively and allows me to be calmer in situations because I'm not stuck in my head. I'm outside of my body. I'm outside of my head, and I'm able to witness what is happening to myself. Next time you're in a situation where you feel like your mind is spiraling, allow yourself to take a step back. Remove yourself from that situation. Observe your thoughts, observe yourself, try to get outside of your body and see reality as is, not what you think it is. And through that, you'll be able to come up with new solutions. We'll be able to respond more calmly and more objectively. And so related to this and related to previous mentioning of Maxwell Maltz, Ryan Holiday gives the example of George Clooney. And George Clooney in his early days couldn't land any movie roles. He was going from one audition to another audition until he realized that he was coming from a place of desperation, as if he was missing something. And so Clooney changed his perspective. So Holiday writes, from Clooney's new perspective, he was that solution. He wasn't going to be someone with something special to offer. He was the answer to their prayers, not the other way around. That was what he began projecting in his auditions. Not exclusively his acting skills, but that he was the man for the job. The difference between right and wrong perspective is everything. And as a result of this, Clooney started landing more roles. And obviously George Clooney is now very well known. And this is a similar advice from Matthew McConaughey's mother. When he calls her one day and says, I'm going for this audition for this movie, his mother says, walk into that audition as if you already own it, as if you've already gotten the role. And so McConaughey did exactly that, and he ended up landing the role. Two things here. It is your perception about yourself that can create the reality that is in front of you. If you think that nobody's going to enjoy listening to you, nobody's going to enjoy being in your presence, you're going to end up projecting this onto others, and people might start to not enjoy it. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because your perception about yourself is distorting reality. And the second thing is, a right perspective allows you to be confident in yourself because you know yourself. You know where it is that you're coming from. You don't project a false confidence about what you can do, what you know. You are simply yourself and you are confident in that. There is something that Nassim Taleb in the episode that we did where he mentions the research by Terry Burnham. And Terry Burnham was studying birds and their traits of dominance, what makes certain birds dominant and whether you can perceive them. So Taleb writes, males, meaning male birds, develop secondary traits that correlate with their fighting ability. Darker color is associated with dominance. However, experimental darkening of lighter males does not raise their status because their behavior is not altered. In fact, these darker birds get killed. As a research, Terry Burnham once told me, birds know that you need to walk the walk. Again, perceiving reality as is, not faking it. And I like this quote from Holiday when he says, an entrepreneur is someone with faith in their ability to make something where there was nothing before. To them, the idea that no one has ever done this or that this is a good thing. When given an unfair task, some rightly see it as a chance to test what they're made of, to give it all they've got, knowing full well how difficult it will be to win. They see it as an opportunity because it is often in the desperate, nothing-to-lose state that we are most creative. Again, this is analogous to our life. Whatever struggles that you have, the obstacles in your path, the impediments, those are unique to you insofar as they are happening to you in the combinations that it happens. But if you can take that challenge upon yourself, make it yours and give it purpose, then only you can solve that issue. that only you can overcome it because you are the only one who is facing it. And that should give us tremendous hope in our situation or whatever the situation is. And so now we move to the section on action. Holiday writes, for some reason, these days we tend to downplay the importance of aggression, of taking risk, of barreling forward. It's probably because it has been negatively associated with certain notions of violence, of masculinity. So when it comes to action, we don't want to second guess. We don't want to overanalyze. We want to be action-oriented. And being action-oriented is the only way forward. What does action-oriented mean? It does not mean being foolish. It does not mean being brash in our actions. Rather, it is taking action on the knowledge and wisdom that we have. Because knowledge without action is dead. And so, if we can take action, through taking action, we will find our path. A quote very close to my heart is, "The way is made by walking on it." The idea here is that only you can walk the path of your life. Nobody else can do it for you. You can get as many advice from your friends, from your family, but only you can take the first step and the next step and the steps following after. And when you look back on your life, that is when you'll see how all the things that happened to you, all the situations, all the obstacles, all made sense and all led to this moment. And our call in life is to be worthy of the suffering that we face. For the suffering to not overtake us, but for us to transmute that suffering into something beautiful. Our whole life, in one sense, is an act of meditation. And so a life properly lived is an act of meditation. Because it is through meditation we become aware of reality as is. We perceive reality as such. And we are able to take action because of it. But if you are meditating incorrectly, you might be a saint for the 10 minutes of total silence. But the rest of your life, you are the devil. You are no different from the debaucherous man, the man who is a slave to his passion. And that is why I say a life properly lived is an act of meditation. And this requires courage. So, Holiday writes, we talk a lot about courage as a society, but we forget that at its most basic level, it's really just taking action. Whether that's approaching someone you're intimidated by, or deciding to finally crack a book on a subject you need to learn. Courage only works when you've been courageous in small acts. We've talked about this before. Courage to rule over yourself and your passion. To take the long road of mastery. That is courage. And those require small acts that you do daily, consistently, week over week, month over month, year over year. And what that builds up is a bank of courage so that in time of need, when true courage is needed, when your courage is called upon, you are able to act without thinking twice, without overanalyzing. There are lots of people who think they're courageous because they can fight. They can fight in the ring, they can fight on the mats, but they live a life of slavery, chained to their passions and unbridled desires. That is not courage. If you remember that quote from Lao Tzu, a man with outward courage dares to die. A man with inward courage dares to live. And he lives a life worthy of the sufferings that befall him because he has overcome them. And in so doing, his life becomes an act of meditation. So you need courage to overcome the impediments in your life. Hence, Holiday writes, once you start attacking an obstacle, quitting is not an option. It cannot enter your head. Abandoning one path for another, that might be more promising. Sure, but that's a far cry from giving up. Once you can envision yourself quitting altogether, you might as well ring the bell. It's done. Reminds me of Arnold Schwarzenegger when he writes, there is no plan B. Right? He goes on to say something like, the moment you have a plan B, the moment you have an escape hatch, the moment you have a lifeboat, a life raft, you've already lost. And you've lost because you haven't given yourself the chance to give it everything that you've got to attack the obstacle in the way. Because when you have that plan B, you're half-heartedly doing whatever it is to endure the suffering. But really, you don't want to be there. Really, you want to go back out the door and try something else. Go somewhere else where there is no suffering, where there is no block. But if you remember the quote from the excerpt, there is no Elysium. There is no land without obstacle. This whole life that we live is filled with obstacle. And the more virtuous you get, the better you get, the more obstacle you will face. And you face them precisely because you have the power, the strength, and the wisdom to overcome these new obstacles. So Holiday says, will is fortitude and wisdom, not just about specific obstacle, but about life itself and where the obstacles we are facing fit within. It gives us ultimate strength. So Holiday mentions the story of how Abe Lincoln, the President of the United States, struggled with depression his whole life. But it was this struggle that shaped him to be such a great leader. Lincoln's will and character essentially were forged in the fire of his depression, of his suffering when he lost his family, he lost his wife at a young age. So Holiday writes about Abraham Lincoln's will and character, quote, "He had traveled from somewhere very far away, somewhere deep inside himself, from where others hadn't. Schooled in suffering, to quote Virgil, Lincoln learned to comfort those who suffer too. This too is part of the will, to think of others, to make the best of a terrible situation that we tried to prevent but could not, to deal with fate with cheerfulness and compassion. Your suffering is painful. Abraham Lincoln's suffering was painful. And when you're in the middle of suffering, there is only darkness. You have no more tears to shed. And when your prayers seem like they're not getting past the ceiling and the colors are dull and your thoughts disappear because you're losing track of it, in that abyss is where your will is forged, is where your character is forged. It is where you find strength unknown to most. And it is where you transmute your suffering into something beautiful. And the only way you find that strength is through the difficult path of walking into hell and making your way back out of it." And one important aspect to note here, which Krishnamurti also mentions, is when thought appears, and in this case, when suffering is happening to you, allow the suffering to pass through you. Do not reject it. Do not abandon it. Do not try to build up a wall and protect yourself from it. Allow yourself to experience the suffering. That requires you to remain in the present moment. And something that Holiday says, and he's quoting Nick Saban, who is a college football coach. And Saban says, "Don't think about winning the SEC championship. Don't think about the national championship. Think about what you need to do in this drill, on this play, in this moment. That's the process. Let's think about what we can do today, the task at hand." And analogously, when you are suffering, do not think about the future. Do not think about anything else. Think about the present moment and be there. And that is part of the process. And if you can master that process, master being able to stay here and think about only what is happening to you now, it never leaves you. Living in the moment is the key to all your actions, as we've previously discussed on the episode with Lao Tzu, the Buddha, Krishnamurti, Eckhart Tolle. It is your ability to be absorbed in the task at hand, and for your consciousness to expand, that your action becomes non-action. If you suffer well, it will not blunt your emotions, it will not blunt your character. Rather, it will sharpen your character and it will sharpen your emotions. You will be able to understand with greater clarity the suffering that others are going through. Your courage will not be mediocre. Your love is not going to be mediocre. Your passions are not going to be mediocre. And throughout all of this, one thing to remember is, in the practice of living in the present, in the practice of overcoming the obstacle day by day, the temptation is going to be the distractions that present itself. To remove your focus from what's happening, to think about the past, to think about the future. So Holiday writes, "When it comes to our action, disorder and distraction are death. The unordered mind loses track of what's in front of it, what matters, and gets distracted by thoughts of the future. The process, if order, it keeps our perception in check and our actions in sync." Distractions are the tactics of the devil, the lower self that plays on you. As we've studied in the episode with C.S. Lewis, the devil is out to get your soul. And in our situation, the lower man is out to get you. The lower man only thinks about himself, nobody else, and it doesn't matter if you die in the process of it all. He'd rather live a short life, die of gluttony, die of obesity, than live a long, healthy life. The lower self is the master of distraction. He is not satisfied with being able to stay in this moment. He'd rather be somewhere else, in the mind or in reality itself. You cannot live in the present if you cannot leave behind your past. And that requires overcoming the lower man. Krishnamurti says, "You are the past looking at the present, translating the present. The present being the challenge, the pain, the anxiety, a dozen things which are the result of the past." You'll notice the similarity between Krishnamurti saying that and what Holiday and the other Stoics have said, which is that it is your attachment to the past that brings the suffering. And for us to overcome the suffering, we have to be present in the moment. Hence, Holiday writes, "It's much easier to control our perception and emotion than it is to give up our desire to control other people and events. It is easier to persist in our efforts and actions than to endure the uncomfortable or the painful. It's easier to think and act than it is to practice wisdom." Wisdom is not the acquisition of knowledge, which we've talked about. It is the slow process of eliminating faulty beliefs. It is chiseling away the marble to bring forth the statue of David. Only through elimination do you get a masterpiece. And it is only through the elimination of faulty beliefs, faulty knowledge, and ideas that we become wise. And I love this quote from Holiday when he says, "To do great things, we need to be able to endure tragedy and setbacks. We've got to love what we do and all that it entails, good and bad. We have to learn to find joy in every single thing that happens." This is a great summation of Stoic philosophy, that whatever happens to you, wish that it didn't happen differently, but wish that what happened to you as it happened. This flips the notion when something unexpected happens to you, because now you come to the situation with the idea that whatever happens to you, unexpected or expected, it was supposed to happen the way it happened. And when that occurs in your mind, you're able to approach the situation in a calm and orderly manner without your mind freaking out, without your mind spiraling out of control. And it is during good times that we're able to cultivate this mindset. So Holiday says, "During good times, we strengthen ourselves and our bodies so that during the difficult times, we can depend on it. We protect our inner fortress so that it may protect us. In the summertime, you feast and you prepare for the winter. You make pickles, you make beef jerky, you store away your food so that when the winter time comes, you have a storage full of food to feed you throughout the winter." There was another quote that he said, "We craft our spiritual strength through physical exercise and our physical hardiness through mental practice." There's a good reason why throughout almost all of the ancient cultures, you find that physical activity of some form, specifically wrestling, is embedded in the culture. Within my own tradition, coming from a mountainous region, wrestling was always part of life. And the most famous example here being the Greeks, where wrestling was just simply part of living and being. Plato, for example, is called Plato because it means broad shoulder. And so Plato was obviously a good wrestler, and he was known to be a local champion. And that's why I like this quote from Holiday, and I'm repeating again. "We craft our spiritual strength through physical exercise and our physical hardiness through mental practice." Why is this important? And I'm quoting, "Our actions can be constrained, but our will can't be. Our plans, even our bodies can be broken, but belief in ourselves, no matter how many times we are thrown back, we alone retain the power to decide to go on once more, or to try another route, or at the very least to accept this reality and decide upon a new aim." Reminiscent again of Viktor Frankl when he says, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. When we are no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Human nature has not changed since the dawn of civilization. And no matter the technological advancement or the political advancement that we make, human nature will always remain the same for a very, very long time. So Holiday writes, you can always remember that a decade earlier, a century earlier, a millennial earlier, someone just like you stood right where you are and felt very similar things, struggling with the very same thoughts. They had no idea that you would exist, but you know that they did. And a century from now, someone will be in your exact position once more. This is why we are doing this podcast. This is why I'm studying all these great human minds, some of the wisest minds in human history, because human nature has not changed. And so the lessons that we learn from Lao Tzu, who lived 2,000 years before us, or from King Solomon, who was even longer than that, we study them because what they to teach us is relevant to us now and will be relevant to us 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now. And that is my hope, that if you're listening to this podcast 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now, you will find wisdom, actionable insights into how you can live your life more meaningfully and more purposefully. And in all of this, the most important thing is the reminder that we are going to die. Memento Mori. So Holiday writes, reminding ourselves each day that we will die helps us treat our time as a gift. Someone on a deadline doesn't indulge himself with attempts at the impossible. He doesn't waste time complaining about how he'd like things to be. And previously he wrote, it's a cliche question to ask. What would I change about my life if the doctor told me I had cancer? After our answer, we inevitably comfort ourselves with the same insidious lie. Well, thank God I don't have cancer. But we do. The diagnosis is terminal for all of us. A death sentence has been decreed. Each second, probability is eating away at the chances that we'll be alive tomorrow. Something is coming, and you'll never be able to stop it. Be ready for when that day comes. Hence, it is important for you and I to face death, to face your mortality, to reflect on the possibility that you could die tomorrow, that you could die tonight when you're going to bed. And ask yourself whether you are ready for it. And if you're not ready for it, ask yourself what it is that you are not doing in your life that you know you should be doing, whether that's developing your character, whether that's giving yourself fully to an activity that you have been abandoning and only giving half-hearted efforts at. And so the challenge for us this week is to remember these three things. Your perception of the world, of reality, shapes how you understand it. So perceive the world without judgment. Observe what is happening to you without labeling it good or bad. Secondly, act on the wisdom and the knowledge that you have. And thirdly, have the will and the fortitude to persist even through the struggle. And the last bit, which we just touched on, the fourth special, is to reflect on your death. Daily, weekly, monthly. And arrive at a point when death has become your friend and you can welcome death whenever he shows up. And with that, I'm going to wrap. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you have not already subscribed, do subscribe and give this podcast a rating on Apple or on Spotify. I appreciate you. Until next week, peace.